order. We'll have the approval of the minutes from the May 16th meeting. We'll have a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Any opposition? Thank you. For a public hearing, we have Little Lighthouse Learning and Care Center, LLC, by Lucinda Mingey and Woodrum Plaza LLC by Brenda Woodrum, have applied for a conditional use permit on 3 parcels containing a combined 0.64 acres located at 410, 416, and 420 West Walnut Street, Danville. The property is zoned downtown, DT, and lies within the historic overlay. Steve.
Thank you. The IT folks just told us they're not sure the mics are on, so make sure your mics are on. And you guys don't have to share the view over there, so.
We're okay. Everybody's got one.
Everyone's got one. All right. Yeah, we'll get started here with the case, and I'll put it up on the screen here. All right. And this microphone. All right. We're all messed up today, but appreciate it, and it's good to see all 7 of you guys here. This happens every now and then. Yeah, it's good. And I want to point out Henry's here, and Lisa's out today, and our intern Courtney's over there doing the minutes. So we may want to holler some names out of who made seconds or slow, so she can get those written down. And she's going to try to record them or take rough notes for Lisa to transcribe later. So let's start with this case here. We have a conditional use permit, and this application was filed on May 30th, 2019. And again, I'll work off the staff report a little bit, but there's going to be photos up here too. They'll be easier to see than your packet. And this has some unique situations here, and I want to point some of those out. The applicant, as you heard, is Little Lighthouse Learning and Care Center, and the property owner is Woodrum Plaza LLC. What we have here are 3 addresses, and this was a little tricky for us. So this is actually 3 pieces of property in big long strips. So the parcel lines go this way, and this building. So this is 410. So 410 and part of 416, the property lines go through this building, is what we have. So we have 3 parcels or strips. So 420 and 416 are on one parcel, part of 416 and the parking lot's on another, and then 410 and part of 416 is on the third. So that's why you see 3 parcel numbers and 3 addresses. And it's critical because there was a prior conditional use done on this in 2000, late 11, 12, and it was just for 416 West Walnut. 420 was brought into the case just simply to allocate parking for this building and this building, but the actual CUP for the daycare was just in this portion of the building right here. This building's really in 3 suites, kind of an A, B, and a C. And there was a dental business at that time back in here, and then the daycare was approved for this portion of the building for 40 kids. And then the parking was kind of all shifted around to figure out how much parking. At that time, these were apartments, and this is a business, and then the dental's back here. So there was a pretty good discussion looking back at the minutes on how parking was to be allocated for the apartments, for guests, for this business, for the daycare, and for the dental care, and there was even going to be a need to do off-site parking through a shared parking agreement on another piece of property to accommodate the parking needs. So that's the tricky thing here on this case, is what we have is the daycare has expanded over the years, and they no longer have 40 kids. They're at a higher number, and what they want to do is get their conditional use permit. In a way, it's an amendment, but in a sense, we're replacing it with a new one. They're going, they've got more kids on the property. They've taken over the bottom floor of this building now. Over the years, it's just expanded. They've also taken over the footprint of the dental business, so they're in all of 416, all of the ground floor here. There's still apartments in this area, and there's a counseling business over here. And so they're back before you guys to basically revise their conditional use permit and get the number bumped up to what they're currently serving on the property. The challenge we have is about the daycare, but at the same time, we probably still have to talk about this parking allocation because there's still X number of spaces on the property. We still have apartments in this area, and we still have a business over in this location. So we'll show you the old plan, and then they've got a new plan, and we'll kind of walk you through that. And again, they're getting a conditional use permit for the daycare. Page 2 of your staff report and page 3, I think are interesting because we're in the downtown zoning district. And again, you would think in a commercial zone, you could do a daycare or beauty shop and different things. But our downtown district only allows certain kind of uses. It exempts others, and it requires other things to get conditional use permits, like daycares and single-family homes, in fact. So on page 3 of your staff report, it outlines the things that need conditional use permits in the downtown district. It says daycare on number 2. But again, some of those other things, restaurants and gas stations and single-family, for some reason our downtown, even though it's a commercial district and allows lots of things, it requires you to get that other approval to do other things. One of the amendments we are currently making in the zoning ordinance would kind of streamline some of this. If you're zone commercial, you'd think by default you could do certain things. There would just be specific rules with those things. Other districts, you might need a conditional use permit. But here, today, you need a conditional use permit. This is a better shot of the parking from up top. Again, showing the buildings. That's 420, that's 410, that's 416. Outdoor play area, and again, showing how the parking was aligned. This is kind of looking in from the street side direction, again, looking in. The old CUP, one of the items was there was to be a shared parking agreement off this property to accommodate the number of parking spaces we needed for all the uses. And again, it was supposed to be over in this location. And that's the zoning map again, showing the downtown. This is the actual plan, and I laid one at your seat. So it's in color, it's a little better. This was the 2000 and I'm gonna say 11, but let me make sure on that. 2012 is when the conditional use permit came before this board, and this was the plan. So again, I laid one out at your seat in color. It's a little easier to see. It's what we have in the file currently that's approved, and you can see up there at the top it says 40 children, and then it allocates 13 spaces and how many the dental business needed, and then in color it kind of lays out how many the apartments needed, how many the business needed, what was going to be general visitor parking, and then here were those shared parking spaces that had to be put into play to meet the parking standard. And then we had 8 conditions on that prior case that related to parking, the 4 businesses that I just described, and then just some housekeeping stuff related to the daycare. So I won't talk too much more about the old case, but again, I think it's interesting. It showed at that time the daycare was in this footprint and the dental business was here. And what they've done since 2012 have grown into this footprint and the bottom floor of this footprint. And then the other businesses are still here and apartments are still up top. So that's kind of where we're starting off at this point with their request today. And so the applicant's here and they have an attorney with them to help navigate through some of this stuff. But if we go back to page 4 of your staff report, I think this is where we jump off with their current request. And as you know, section 3 of the zoning ordinance 387 says when we do a conditional use permit, you guys can ask for conditions, or conditions are submitted to address compatibility issues. The applicants did a real nice narrative there you can see in that italicized text right there about the daycare. And then the conditions are right there in the middle of the page, and I'll read the conditions that they have submitted at this point on the application. And they did submit these other drawings that this is in your packet. That shows section A, B, and C from street view. And then they submitted these. They look like an engineer drew them because they're busy, but they're busy for a reason. They're trying to break out all the different footprints, and they were, at my request, trying to show how many kids are in what spaces. Because even though the building, this is one building back there in the back, it's in multiple spaces. There's different kids being taught or cared for in different parts of the building. So you can kind of see there's 27 kids right here, 10 in this general area, 14. So there's 51 kids shown on what would be the back building, building 4, address 416. And then this is the building that's closer to the road, the 410. This is just showing you classroom square footages, and then this shows that there's 48 kids at this current time in kind of this main building there on that first floor. And then this is the license that they showed us from the state that shows they're currently licensed for 121 kids. So going back to the actual exhibit, or the conditions on page 4, the conditions that they outlined on number 1 relate to those exhibits, and it shows how many square footages were in the different sections and the ages of the kids. But what we didn't get is a head count on the number of kids they're asking for. And I think just talking with the attorney before the meeting, the license is for 121. Those exhibits add up to 99 kids. And I think they need to probably clarify what their actual request is and the number of children, because I think that's one of those qualifying things we do on a conditional use for a daycare, is we approve a number of kids, possibly employees and parking too. If it was a bed and breakfast, we'd approve a number of rentable rooms. So I think we need probably that item clarified on, are we asking for 99 that are shown on the exhibit, or are we asking for the 121 shown on the license? But number 1 outlines kind of all the square footages that they have the kids in different areas of the buildings. 2 says preschool operates during the course of a normal school day. The interior play areas measure 1684. And then there's an external play area of 1,325 square foot pursuant to the state law. They're required to have 35 feet of care play area per child. So they have indoor play area and outdoor play area currently on the facility, and those are those 2 numbers. So those are the 4 conditions. And then going through your staff report, of course, jumping through all their exhibits, you get back to the next numbered page, you see our page 5. And there's the review criteria that we use in Article 3, 8, 4. These are the things you guys look at when you look at the conditional use. 3, 8, 5 are your required findings. And then there's the staff items of concern. And I just sort of left 3 kind of generic notes there that say parking, number of children, and signage. And what the staff concerns are, again, on parking, I think we need to probably make sure we have the right parking to accommodate all the uses. So it's kind of going back to that other exhibit and kind of rehashing this kind of exhibit and making sure we have enough parking, and it appears we do. But at that time in place, we had 40 kids and a number of professionals. At this time, we have 120 kids and a number of professionals and a number of apartments and another business. So I calculated some of the parking. But our daycare parking is a little bit old in style. It says we require 1 space for every 10 kids. So that would be 21 parking spaces. Or I'm sorry, that's, 21 parking spaces. What it doesn't accommodate for is professional staff. So maybe the standard was 1 for every 10 kids to accommodate staff. But as we're moving forward with the new zoning ordinance rewrite, we're going to have a parking standard for a daycare, for example, it'll be 1 for so many kids, assuming there's drop-offs and clients coming in, and then 1 space for every staff maximum shift. I think that way you know you got enough parking. At the same time, we have apartments. I'm not sure how many apartments are on the 2nd floor, but we need 2 spaces for every one of those apartment buildings. And then we have retail space over here in floor 20. And again, we need to accommodate it with approximately 4 parking spaces. And then you need some guest spaces. So I think that's how you kind of look at parking holistically is, what's going to work for 120 kids and X number of professionals, X number of apartments, and X number of retail square footage in that 420 building. And I think we can get to a number fairly quickly and ask the applicants if they're okay with it. What we have on site is what we have on site, though. And prior, again, that's all the count we have that was allocated when we had 40 kids and whatever professional staff at that time. But we had more apartments at that time, and now we have substituted uses is what we've done. We obviously need a number committed to on the number of kids. I think that's important. That's something we can follow through into the future. And then I left signage, and this is just another small thing. As you can see the building right here where they've moved into, this is not an old, this is 2018 street view. There's a sign up there now on both these kind of marquee sides We did not get a sign permit in our office for that. Additionally, we're in the historic district, and so my staff concern on that would be, I'm not a big fan of sign permits after the fact. If something slipped through the cracks, it did. But I think what we should do as a condition is on the signage, ask the applicants to follow through with the historic board part of that. Require that the signage that is up go through a review of the Architectural Heritage Board, make sure it meets their standards. I'm not 100% sure the sign that's up there now would meet the historic standards. And what I would request that the signage go through the historic board and get a COA. There's no cost for that, but they go through that approval process. If that sign is approvable under their standards, I think we would just issue them a courtesy permit for the sign, again, at no cost. There's no point for us to charge a few bucks for a sign a year or something later. But we definitely checked, and there's no sign permit that we got. And at some point, again, the applicants can describe for us when they went from this building into the other space, whatever time of year that was or what year that was. We just know they sort of expanded on the property, and then we found out, or we worked, actually they came and talked to us about their expansion, and I said,
Any questions for Steve? We probably will have some.
okay, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
And they've got some folks here, and
Okay.
Mr. Tucker's here to represent them, the local.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm Chris Tucker. I'm here with Lucinda Mingey, the owner of the daycare.
Ms. Mingey, I need you to raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm the statements you're about to make are true and correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think Mr. Hunter did a good job of laying out kind of what we're here for today. You know, Ms. Mingey is a business owner of a successful business that's vital to the downtown area. She enjoys being downtown. She wants to stay downtown. You know, a number of her children that she services, their parents work downtown. Just kind of a vital part of downtown. So we're here today to answer any questions you may have or try to get through this the best way we can.
I guess I'm a little concerned that you expanded without coming in for approval.
And I can let Ms. Mingey speak to that. My understanding is that it was just, I guess, basically an oversight, a misunderstanding. She believed she had the use for those buildings. As soon as we became aware of the situation, like we said, we immediately took steps to correct the situation. There was not anything willful or malicious. It was just an oversight.
And also, my concern is parking. I'd be I know what a daycare is like. I took my granddaughter for years, and it's like, oh, please, it was crazy in the mornings and in the evenings. So what's your solution for the extra parking you're going to need for 120 kids, for up to 120 kids?
Right now, I believe, according to Ms. Mingey, we have 25 spots.
25.
And Ms. Brenda Woodrum is here too, the property owner, so if we
How
need
many
to text
staff?
her.
Between 18 and 20, but they come and go. Like I have a part-time staff. They'll come in the morning, and then they leave, and then the other
Speaking
people
to the
come in.
microphone so
Sorry.
Courtney can hear you.
Sorry. I'll have somebody come in the morning, and then I have someone back up to them. So when I say that I believe I have, and I wasn't prepared for this, but I think I have 6 full-time employees.
You said 18 to 20 parking spaces for your staff.
I'm sorry.
Did you say 18 to 20 parking spaces for your staff?
No, what I'm saying is that if I have a staff come in at 7 o'clock, they would leave at noon. I have another employee that would come in noon that would take their parking spot.
Right.
And then they would go home.
But
So
what's your total staff?
I'm sorry?
What's your total staff numbers? How many are you
My total s-
required to have for
Right,
120
right now,
kids?
because of the summer, it's 20, approximately 20. But it would go back down because I have 40 extra kids for the summer.
Right.
So that would go back down to them being there from 3 to 6
But you
o'clock.
do have those kids for the summer.
I do. Yes.
So you're required to have how many staff right now?
It's hard to say without breaking down to each classroom.
Ballpark.
I'm sorry?
Ballpark, at any one time, what's your maximum
Well, if I have
staff?
18 to 20, that's what I
18
feel that I need.
18 to 20.
Yeah.
And you have 25 parking spaces? Is that what I heard
Yeah,
you say?
at least, and I think there's some more on the other side that I don't use.
Because 25 parking spaces would not be enough if you have 20 staff and you have parents coming in and out.
But I don't have all those people there at the same time.
Oh, I know, but you have a lot of them at the same time, because I've been at other daycares, and it's crazy in the morning, or the afternoon when they're picking up kids. That only gives you 5 spots, and that's a little bit of concern to me. I don't know about anybody else.
Well, how many staff do you have there at one time?
Exactly. I probably have, give me just a second to count. I would have 3 over there. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. At most, I would have 10 at one time.
10 at one time, so that
At
would leave
one,
you
at one
15
time.
spaces.
Could maybe go up to 11 or 12, but at most, 10.
So that would leave you 12 to 15 spaces.
And that's high, and that's a high number. I'm giving you a high number, because they come in shifts. Like, I'll have my first set of employees at 7 o'clock. I get my last employee at 10 o'clock in the morning. So it's only because that's how the kids come in with the parents with their working shift. So I get parents that work 9 to 5, I get parents that work 7 to 3. So it just depends on when they drop the children off. My busiest time would be between 8 and 8:30 in the morning. But those parents have already left, and then a new set of parents come in. So it's just that constant movement of employees and people coming and going in the daycare.
Do you have,
I'm sorry.
go ahead, Don.
Is there a staffing ratio per child,
Yes,
which is,
it's very complicated.
Depends on the age.
Yeah, it's according to the age. So like from
my point was then that fluctuates also.
the ratio, yeah, what you can do though is like in the morning when we have our infants, we can group them together with 1-year-olds, and so we go over that ratio. And then when we have 2-year-olds, we can put our 2-year-olds with our 3-year-olds until we go over ratio. So yeah, it's complicated.
What about other parking for the other people in the area, like the apartments and the business? How much parking do they
As
have?
far as I understand, there's only one occupant of the 2 apartments upstairs. He took both apartments, so there's one occupant there. And then I took over that whole Muddy Creek area, so I have all that parking there. And then the back building, I took over the dentist, so I've got her parking. And then this person in that brick house right there, she usually parks in the front, because she's a psychologist or psychiatrist or something. She'll have her clients come in, but she's got a red Toyota, and that's the only vehicle I've ever seen there in terms of her employees. I don't think she has any other staff.
There's a sign posted there that you can only use so many spaces from about the middle of the house
I think
forward.
Brenda's done that because of the people with the apartment upstairs, to give them spot there to park.
And the number of people in the apartments could fluctuate, which would,
Yeah, I see a husband and a wife, and they have 2 teenage children, and then, they may have people on the weekends come in, but I think he's a retired police officer.
I think there's only 2 apartments from my
There's only 2
understanding.
apartments up there, right? And he's got both of them. He's got both spots. So I think one of them is a 1-bedroom, one's a 2-bedroom. So then he lets the teenage son stay. I'm assuming, I've not spoken to him about it. But neither one of those teenagers drive. They're young, 14, 15 years old.
And can you have your staff, or I guess 4 or 6 of them, park in the lot that we can't see, that's over to the right of where the dentist was? Can they park away back there so that the spots that we see are open to the customers?
That's exactly what we do. Is so if I have 1 or 2, usually on this side of the building, I'll have them park in that far spot. And then the other staff will park to the left, mostly because of the playground being right there. And that way we have another blockage with the, and then the people with the Muddy Creek building will park right up at that end where that silver car is. You'll see those cars parked there. And I never let anybody park by that front door there, those 2 spots right there, just so that parents can get in and out when they're dropping their kids off. And then that front area, same thing, because there's 2 handicap parking spots there. So when the parents come in, they've got a clear shot right down into the facility. So we're always parking off to the sides and then in that front, yes. And that's why when we're sharing spots, the employee that's coming in at noon is parking with the employee that left, just for that reason, so that that straight shot is always there, yes.
Do you plan to reach 121 children?
I'm sorry?
Do you plan to have as many as 121 children?
No, because the state is the one that actually came in and measured the dimensions, but I personally, being in this business for 16 years, I don't do that in my classrooms. I just won't. I think it's too many children in a classroom, and that's my numbers average right now between 95 and 100, and there may have been a few times that I maybe went 102, but very, very rarely. I like to keep my class sizes smaller. I could pack them in there. I just won't do that. I think it's too much on the staff, and I personally don't want to do that.
Are you agreeable to having a max of 100 children?
Am I agreeable to that? Mhm.
Okay.
And the drawing that he showed you was a drawing that my son actually did for me, so that's why the numbers are off a little bit with what we have and what our capacity is to what the state is. When the state comes in, they officially mark it with all their equipment. So they're the ones that licensed me for 121 based on the square footage of what I have.
Yeah.
Do you need to think about that you're agreeable to 100?
That was one question I was going to raise. There are times, a lot of times the number of enrolled
Right, they don't.
children do not match the number that are actually in attendance. So there may be, if she has 110 enrolled, there could be probably average 90 to 95 children there. So I
I'm
would
talking
request.
about a
and I-
maximum of 100 children in attendance.
I'm
I
sorry.
don't care about enrollment because I know people move and don't
Exactly.
change enrollment, but I would say max of 100 children in attendance at any one time.
I'm sorry, you're saying? 100?
Max of 100 children in attendance at any one time.
Is that something you could work with, or is
Yeah.
it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want you to trap
Yeah,
yourself.
I know.
I'm sorry?
I don't want you to trap yourself right there.
Yeah, and that's,
Could we go to 110?
I could show you my enrollment. That very rarely happens, because what happens is people go on vacation, people are sick. I have part-time families. A lot of the daycares in the area will not take part-time children. But I do, because I know that there are some parents that need to work 2 days a week and not 3 and 4. So when I say that I have that enrollment of 110, that's because, just like my parking, someone may be there, and literally on Tuesday and Thursday, I take care of another family on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. At the hospital especially, because they do that with their shift. Denyo, there's several businesses in here, I can't think off the top of my head, where they only work a couple of days a week. There's nobody in Danville that will take those children, and they make the parent pay the full enrollment. I don't. If I can back them up to someone else, that's why, like you say, with 110, that's why my enrollment is that, but I don't necessarily have 110 there.
But
It just gives me the ability.
would 110 max in attendance be?
I think that would be, I think that would be fair, considering the state says I can have 121 there. That's what they tell me I
I
can
would
have.
be okay with that.
Ms. Mingey?
Yes.
Over here. Does the state require certain types of record keeping so that you would have a good,
Yes.
something to show for that attendance
I
as
do.
opposed to the enrollment? Okay.
I do,
Thank you.
yes. And I just went up for renewal here 2 weeks ago, and they checked it all out, so yes.
I'd like some clarification on square footage and what it includes. In addition to these interior, there's an external fence and play areas of approximately 1,325 square feet. And I'm thinking I'm seeing 2,000 up here.
Because we have, and I don't know if that picture is there, on the, where we have the one area in front of 416, okay? And then off to the side, right in the back, so that's 416. There's another area that I made just for the 1-year-old children, so that they're not out on the facility with the, which I wouldn't do it anyway, but it got a little bit of a grade because Paul or Barry told me that's the only place I could put
Backs
my
up to the
outdoor.
other one, is that
I'm sorry?
correct? Don't they back up to each other
Yeah, and they,
on the side?
If you look at the building right now, it's the right side.
oh, it's right, yeah, okay, good,
What the photos see.
It's right in there. And that's very flat so that my 1-year-olds can walk without tripping and falling. And it's gated off. It's actually fenced off so that they can't get into the other area. And it's just a safety issue that I implemented.
And then I'd like clarification on this. A daycare is required to have 35 square feet of care/play area per child. Does that include indoors and outdoors? Just outdoors?
It could be, well, what it is, when they say, it could be both, as long as you have a place that they can play. And because we were limited, what we do is we just take the children out in shifts. So like that play area right there, I will have like someone go out at 9 o'clock, then they go back in with their kids, and the next group of children go out. And then, so we're constantly shifting the children in and out on the outdoor play area. And then inside the classrooms, that's why my square footage with what I'm allowed to have is higher by the state, because my classroom sizes are bigger than what they're required to be. So even though that classroom may only have 10 children in it, because of the square footage, I could have 12 to 14, but I choose not to do that. But then that gives them the extra space to kind of romp around inside without bumping into each other.
Anyone have any questions?
It is, it's a complicated business.
Yeah, I'm confused because the numbers of the children change also, and so your square footage would change depending on how many children were there. I'm confused on that.
Well, the
Let me
required-
clarify something real quick. So, and again, it is complicated, but her license is what kind of spells all that. The state has already come and made all that allocation for her indoor, outdoor space, the number she needs, the classrooms, eating, sleeping, and then gave her that number based on what those buildings can accommodate.
Based on the 2,000.
No, based on what's physically in those buildings, because as she's saying, some of that indoor space doesn't all have to be in one area of the building. It can actually be in a classroom, and they're counting different square footages throughout all the buildings to get to the total number they need for the 121. And then you got different age kids, and the
Yeah,
state's
I
got
was-
some flexibility on some of those, way they calculate
That
their
I
spaces.
understand. I was more concerned about the play area outside.
The outside play area was initially in the old one shown as 2,000 and then developed in kind of two sections for the different age kids. And at this point, again, their play area that the state's looked at is indoor and outdoor and meets their standard, the way I understood it.
Yes, it does.
For 121.
120.
Any more questions? If not, do I hear a motion?
Do we address the signage?
Well,
Oh.
signage, yes.
Yeah,
Signage we do address.
Do that, or?
Can
Let's
I
do
make-
that.
Can I don't know if you call it defend myself on that. I did go to the Historic Society. I sat down in a meeting like this. I don't remember if it was here or somewhere else. And I had to go before people, and they had to tell me what I could have, because that sign was rotting out. So I knew I had to have permission to replace that board. And so when I went there, they approved it, and they told me how I could take it out, the plywood that had to go, the paint that had to go on it, and the trim. And I got that, I did get that approved, so I'm not sure I'll go back to my.
That was
No,
through,
no, you
that was
don't need
through
to.
who, ma'am?
I'm sorry,
Yeah, that was approved through who? Who did you go before?
would it be the historic board? It was a board of people.
Was it in this room right here?
I think it was in this room, and if it wasn't, it was something that
We
looked
can,
like
we can
this.
check on that. All we checked was we didn't have a sign permit, and before we issue them in historic district, there's another process. And so we can double check with the city, but if she's already gone through the city on that, that's fine with us. We just didn't get a sign permit. We just wanna
Well,
make
all
sure
we
the
would need
historic-
is to amend this to say the signage will meet requirements of the historic board.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
again, whatever we need to do to accommodate or comply, we're more than willing.
And I've got a letter somewhere, so I'll check.
And a max of 110 children, you agreed to that? That would
I'll
be the
agree
only
to
two
that,
things
yeah.
that I
I
would
think that's fair.
add to the,
And again, I'll be honest with you, we don't have a parking problem. We really don't. I know it seems crazy with having that many kids, but we really, honestly, they come and go, and because we separate and we don't park in that front area, we really don't. And I know you're concerned too, because I know of another daycare that's on the corner. I'm like, how does the state allow that? But I'm very, very conscious of that. I'm very concerned about that. And, I don't want anything to happen to them.
And I'll just clarify, the property owner is in the back, and she helped me understand some of the parking of the other tenants real quick. And there's 5 spaces allocated for 420. And even though there's only 2 apartments upstairs, one of them's a 1-bedroom apartment. And so what she explained is that our standard is 2 per unit, but in reality, there's only really 2 cars that are coming and going on a regular basis for the upstairs. And so when we just did we calculated all the numbers based on our standard, it would only need 20 spaces total.
Okay.
So, again, we don't actually have the standard today of employees max shift, but it's a smart way to think about it, and that's where we're heading. So again, this is a street shot from a normal day, and as you can see, there's parking spaces there, open, and there's probably a delivery time that's heavier or not as heavy, but they seem to be parking it fairly well. We just wanted to make sure we weren't taking anyone else's spaces, and we weren't sure on all the splits, and the owner just helped me understand how many tenants are in the other building.
Okay. All right, do I have any questions from anyone? If not, a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the conditional use permit for daycare center located at 410, 416, and a portion of 420 West Walnut Street, with the conditions, the 4 conditions that were part of this submission, plus the conditions that the signage will meet the conditions of the historical board, and that the attendance won't exceed 110, based on the findings of the facts.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Do we have any old business? New business, election of officers.
Yep, so it's that time of year. You guys, your bylaws say you all elect officers sometime in the spring, but they do take effect July 1 of the new fiscal year. So we're
So
pretty
we will
timely
do
right
that.
now. So again, how you guys want to handle that? You sometimes are just throwing a slate of nomination. You know, right now, I think Burgess chair, David's vice chair. Yeah, I think that's right, and you're.
I'm Donna.
You're acting secretary as a 3rd officer, which was helpful at one meeting when some other folks had some conflicts. Even though you're not recording the minutes as the secretary, that is an officer that we have, so we have 3 officers, and then at one point, the secretary had to chair one of the meetings.
Don't everyone volunteer at once?
Yeah, and again, however you guys want to handle that.
Yeah, just don't everyone volunteer at once.
I think we're rolling pretty good like we are.
I move that we accept the same slate.
Is that okay with everybody else?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And Steve, you have a couple of things.
Yeah, while we're here, just thought I'd talk about one thing, and I laid something at your desk. The zoning ordinance, first half, I went through all that with you guys on the changes a couple months back, and we're into the second half of the zoning ordinance rewrite. It's a lot of stuff. It's generated a lot more interest. It's the uses, it's the standards. It's just a lot of things that go in with the zoning ordinance the second time. Signs are in there, and we went ahead and met with a lot of business owners over the last few months, and I laid the sign section at your desk, and I'd be glad to walk through it, but I'm probably not going to go through all this for you guys today, but I want to explain how the process is unfolding with this next phase. The text of the zoning ordinance, the revised text is about 110 pages for 2 chapters, and the old text is about 300 pages that's going away. The Planning Commission is having a hearing this month, and in fact, the packets went out yesterday, and they're thick. And what the plan is that the Planning Commission is going to open the hearing. We're going to start to walk them through signs, landscaping, stuff about the pipeline, Airbnbs, there's a ton of stuff. We're changing the district names, we're changing standards, we're looking at the way parking should be modernized. We're looking at uses in the historic district, in the downtown, all kinds of stuff. So we're gonna start walking the Planning Commission through that just incrementally. And we're gonna table the meeting in June. There's not gonna be a vote in June, possibly not July, but we're gonna open the hearing, get the staff proposal into the record, and anyone that wants to show up and comment on text or has a concern or criticism, whatever, we want to have that in the public hearing forum, and then ultimately let the Planning Commission do their job, which is sort through what I'm proposing, maybe versus what someone else thinks the text ought to say. Obviously, signs are a big deal when you're changing commercial signs in your town, but we went out and we had the chamber rally all the business owners, and Henry was there. We had a pretty good crowd of business owners. We walked them through every section of the sign changes. The sign ordinance is going from 27 pages to approximately 7. It's streamlined because we're using charts and graphs a little differently. And we walked it through, and we didn't have any comments at all. Not a single negative comment from the business owners in town on signage. We are, and again, it's confusing a little bit, and we went through this, but the sign rules that we used to have can no longer be the style we have because of a Supreme Court case. We had sign rules for daycares, for churches, for nonprofits, for campaign signs, for real estate signs, for commercial businesses, for drive-throughs. And what the Supreme Court ruled was you can't have sign verbiage like that or sign regulations. If you have to read the sign to know the rules, it's a violation of the Constitution, I guess. So the Supreme Court ruled that signs have to be generic. Sign ordinances in zoning ordinances have to be generic and what's called content neutral. So again, if I have to read the sign and say, oh, that's a campaign sign, I turn to this page, there's a rule, can't have it. So the rules have to be generic, and that's what we've tried to put forward. Generic sign rules by residential or by use type. So there's rules for residential areas, commercial areas, industrial areas, multifamily areas. So they're generic in form, how big, how tall, where at on the ground. But we no longer can have rules for campaign signs or real estate signs or fast food signs. We can't have them that specific. So we're moving up the hill a little bit and going by use type. Commercial signs will be all the same for all users out there, whether they're zoned highway commercial or rural commercial or whatever. They'll be the same rules for, but then we have a chart in there that sort of starts to split them out on heights and sizes by zoning district. But as far as the rules, like for example, nonprofits can do this, and churches get to do this, and daycares do that, we no longer have that style sign ordinance anymore. So that's why the sign ordinance has shrunk down to what it has. And what you guys have in your hand are basically, the handout I gave you are basically a couple definitions, and then the commercial sign standards is what we went out and showed the business owners. And again, we didn't have any pushback at all at this point in time. We're making the signs a little shorter, but we're giving them a little more face. Clearly, we've got some challenges with signs in this town. You drive by a lot of strip centers and the way we do wall signs. You guys have had to hear variances to go, so you could put 4 signs on a building, you know, the Starbucks example, the McDonald's example. We were real restrictive on wall signage, on how many walls. Most towns don't regulate how many walls, just how big. We're going down that kind of road as, you know, just an X percentage of a wall. And if you got 4 walls, you get 4 signs.
Will the current businesses be grandfathered in?
They'd all be grandfathered in, which would just be unbelievable issue as we move forward. But that's what we'll do. But we're bumping up the face a tad bit because the 100 square foot, right now the rules are really complicated. And I've explained to you guys before on these commercial businesses. It's based on linear feet of frontage, kind of, and then it's got a cap, and then it doesn't have a cap. So the way the rules are, for example, if we're out on the bypass, in general, you tell people the signs are 30 foot tall, 100 square foot, kind of. If you have frontage less than 100, you get 64 square feet. So you might be sitting there with 99 foot of frontage and your neighbor's got 100. He gets 100 square foot of sign and you get 36% less. You get 64. If you had 40 foot of frontage, you never get less than 64, you get 64. So it's linear foot based, but if you're under 64, you get 64. And if you're between 64 and 99, you get 64. And if you're 100 and above, you get 100. Figure out the fairness factor there. So we're just going to a commercial signs, get 128 square foot of sign face. So we're bumping it up from 100 to 128. By the way, you go in multiples of 12 because that's how they make sign panels. 1x12s, 2x12s, 3x12s. That's what the legs typically are. A pole sign might be shorter, but when they go to dual pole legs, they're always 12-foot panels as we go up the hill. And they always start at 12 foot in the air because it's a free zone from 3 to 10 for sight distance. So the 128 bumps up the face, and it's strategic, honestly, but we're bringing them down from 30 foot to 24. Part of the reason is you want to make the change on the height and the face to encourage new signs to go up. Because what happens now is people hold those old poles out there thinking they've got a good example, the King Buffet sign that's sitting up there that's been gone. It's sitting there with the assumption going, hey, when the new business comes in, we'll get to do a 50-footer with all that face. Well, what we're doing is we're changing all the standards to force the signs to be new when they come in, so we're not using rusted poles and old sign faces. They're all grandfathered in, but there's a carrot past that. You know, you can get a little more sign, but you're gonna put a newer, higher quality sign up. And then and then the 30-footers we had historically, we're creating a new view shed by making them, you know, at some point they were all 40, then they became 30, and as you look down the bypass, you just see sign face, they just overlap. By bringing them down, it actually, if I was a business owner, I'm like, wow, I have to make them a little shorter, but I get a little more face. I actually can get an advantage on my competitor, and I'll actually have a more visible sign because I'm not in that exact hierarchy of 30 foot. We met with the sign companies, they like it. The business owners liked it. There's some folks in town don't like it because I guess we're giving them, the businesses, a little more face. The other part of that equation, if you go by our strip centers and try to read these little puny wall signs on some, you can't read them. And then the businesses that try to put all the names on one sign, it doesn't work with 100 square foot. It never has, and you clearly can drive around and realize the signs don't work. So we're gonna do something different with consolidated shopping center signs and business signs to make them, you know, more functional. And modernize the ordinance and make it more generic so we're not violating the Supreme Court directive. So then there's temporary sign issues and all other issues in there too. But the comment I heard before the meeting was, you know, what about campaign signs, real estate signs? Unfortunately, we can't drill down and have regulations specific on those any longer, unless there's another way to do it.
Or you can if they're, depending on the area they're in, whether it be business or.
Yeah, so what we've got in the residential zone, we say how big, but we're getting away from the durations and all those kind of things, because the durations then would have to be just for the campaign signs. You would never put durations for a real estate sign or a yard sale sign, or they'd all be different. So what we did is we said you can have temporary signs in the residential zone, and those signs are things like seasonal event signs, personal expression signs, property sale signs, but they don't have any other rules other than stay out of the right-of-way, and they're no bigger than 4 square feet.
We are getting more and more of the signs that are on schools now, on churches that have the flashing lights with scrolling text. and all
LED
of that.
signs, yeah.
Those are probably not regulated in the old policy.
They are. They are.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends how far back you go, but are we doing anything new to try to?
Sort of,
that down?
yeah. And couple tools that are real simple. First off, we did allow them in the old ordinance, and we call them LED, but the industry term is electronic message display signs. They move and look like TVs and scroll and do things. You all have seen them around. They're allowed in our town now. What we do is we've got this weird chart that depending on your frontage and how far you are from a property line, every foot adjusts how big the sign can be and how bright it can be. Yet, that's not a real industry standard. A foot candle standard is measured at a property line in the old ordinance, and in the industry, we measure foot candles 20 foot from the front of a face. So you stand by the sign and measure it. You don't have to go to a property line to determine how bright. The industry term is a half a foot candle at 20 foot from the sign face. That's how you determine brightness. So we're incorporating that to start with. So they'll never be brighter than is allowed to start with. Number two, the changing of the message is what can become somewhat bothersome or interfere with driving or appear to blink. So we've set a standard on how long the message has to stay static, and then how long it has to take as to change from message to message, as opposed to go from message, message, message. It's going to have to turn slower and stay static longer. That's how you handle the flash effect or the movement effect of the sign. But we don't prohibit LED signs or electronic signs in any commercial districts. But churches, for an example, because now we have standards in residential, multifamily, commercial, we don't allow those kind of signs in residential zones. So by default, if a church happens to be in a residential zone, they're going to have to follow the generic sign standards of the residential zone, which in general would be of a residential character. If we're out on the bypass and we're in a commercial zone, we're going to allow every kind of sign type, but we're not going to regulate LED signs as a sign product out there.
Schools that are in residential areas.
They're exempt anyhow. Schools are
They
exempt.
can do anything they want.
They're government. We don't even touch them or get a chance, nor should we. We don't regulate
They
schools.
have an option to touch them.
They're government. Only Center would fall into, because they're private. And I don't,
think we have.
and I don't think Center has any LEDs of any kind, but
But you're saying basically like Seminary has, we have the flashing sign. But you go to Calvary and they could not have one.
well, everyone's got what they got today.
Well, but they
grandfathered
don't
in.
have one.
But as we move forward, I didn't give you the residential sign standards, but in a residential district, we have what can be internally illuminated, what can be externally illuminated, and whether or not you can do an LED sign. The two big issues you're gonna run into for a church, let's say they're in a true single-family district. We limit how big signs can be in general, because the only signs that should exist in the residential zone should be ones that they come get a home occupation-based sign, or those personal expression signs, or campaign signs. So to get a 64 square foot sign in a residential zone, that won't exist either. Those oddball uses that happen to be in a single-family district or a duplex district are probably gonna have to come get variances if they wanna get them big. But as far as going LED with them, they probably ought to do them now. Because we're trying to look at the whole character of the use type. So in the single-family zone, what normally do we have? Houses. And if there happens to be a church or a daycare, I mean, to give them special sign rules goes right back to that Supreme Court directive. We would have to write a rule for a church in a single-family zone so they could do something. And what we're saying is it ought to flow within the district. Those signs will just have to be externally illuminated. If you want an LED sign, you need to be in a commercial zone. That's where those LED signs would be, or an industrial zone, or of that nature. We're going to create what's called a neighborhood business zone, which is a transition between neighborhoods and heavy commercial, and we're not going to allow those kind of signs in that neighborhood business zone either. It's supposed to be smaller signs, less scale, less bright. Again, the whole idea is you got a house possibly next door, and we don't need a bright flashing sign in a residential neighborhood. So, but we're controlling your question, David, is by that flash, and that's in that sign section right there on 441. It says electronic message display shall have a minimum display time of 6 seconds per message. So they got to stay stagnant. You know, they can't just flash, 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 you know, and show other things. 6 seconds, then change. 6 seconds, then change. And then they got to change in a certain duration so it's not too fast. The other thing we got to be careful about as LEDs become the vogue sign everywhere is we still can't have off-premise messages. So simply because I, you know, let's say I own a Sonic and I think, hey, I could earn a few bucks and advertise Smith Law Firm on there every 10th message. We can't do that. We don't allow. That'd be an off-premise sign. But that's what's happening out there. It's a big investment to put an LED sign up there, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. And so some people, the sign companies will tell them, hey, you could recoup your money by, you know, put a few realtors' names on there and a couple of attorneys and the hammer, he's everywhere, right? and you could recoup $1,000 a month in sign rental. Well, you can't do that. It's old ordinance or continue today. Those LED signs are for the business on that site, and then they can flash whatever messages relate to that business. Again, I'm not going to go through all this, but if you guys want to come to the Planning Commission meeting the next couple months, just to hear all this text changes, we've been out meeting with different groups on different topics. The Airbnb stuff's been something that's been really discussed. Signs have been one of those issues. And again, we're changing the district names back the old way, R1, R2, R3, like they used to be, and a lot of other changes. So again, I'll be glad to answer any questions about that. But that's the plan, is we're going to start next week from yesterday. We're going to be at the Planning Commission, and my PowerPoint I was working on this morning right now is 160 some slides. And I might weed it down, but I got more to add. we got to show the planning commission old versus new, and we're walking through every page of those 110 pages of changes. And, again, I'm glad to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions?
I understand that these new proposed regulations do not come before our group. They are in fact approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission
Well,
itself.
that's just one part. They actually are just recommended by the planning commission. They have to go to the planning commission, then they have to go to all the governments. They don't become final till there's an ordinance adopted by City of Danville, Boyle County, and Perryville, and Junction City ultimately. That's when they become official.
And I hear what you said, that you don't plan on asking for approval at the initial presentation.
No, we're gonna table the hearing.
And that you will accept comments
Sure.
from people
Sure,
on site.
sure.
My suggestion is that you also accept written comments, public comments, and those would be considered by
Well,
the
let
commission.
me say,
And my reasoning is, the times available at Planning and Zoning Commission meetings are pretty full.
sure.
And to give the public enough opportunity for input, I think the possibility of submitting written comments.
Let me tell you the pros and cons, and Henry can jump in here. That is fine if someone wants to do that, but at the end of the day, we're a hearing board, like you all are, and the planning commission has to take evidence, and in that case, if someone was submitting written comments as, let's say, opposition to how we're gonna handle LED signs, I think to be fair to the staff and the planning commission, that person probably needs to be there, testify, just like anyone else is gonna testify. Planning commission may wanna ask them a question. Just like a petition coming in, I think and this is a text amendment, so it's a little different, but if they wanna submit written comments, that's great. But how they're gonna be vetted at the planning commission, what if the planning commission wants to ask them a question? What if Henry has a question about something? What if the staff has a concern? I think, if they can come to the hearing, it's better. We'll take those comments. But for example, we may have a petition right now that comes our way on this Airbnb stuff. That's fine. We're gonna put a proposal forward, and if those folks wanna come say we're against it, or we have a different way we think we should handle it, I think the planning commission really, it's best to hear from folks and testify right here. Of course, the podium's over there at the planning commission, and come here and tell them what they think. Ultimately, the planning commission got to digest all this stuff and make a vote. The other thing I think on that, I don't think we're going to have much blowback. There's been a lot of people speculating on the text just went out yesterday. Just went out, but I've been meeting with some different groups on small things. I seriously doubt there's going to be any comments other than on the signs and the Airbnb. There's one issue out in the county that might come up, and we'll just let's see if it shows up. But I don't think we're going to have any written comments on anything else or anybody else. I think when you see, and again, I think there's been some talk about the pipeline issue. What's in there now is better. Henry's been looking at it. What's in there than what we had? It's 10 notches better. I can guarantee that. I don't think anyone's going to have a single problem with that issue. I seriously doubt we'll have that many people come into the meeting, other than the Airbnb issue, to object to some of this proposed text. I just don't see it happening. No one's read the text yet, but everyone's made an assumption they don't like it or there's a problem. So we spent a lot of time walking through a process and putting standards into play and organizing the ordinance, changing setbacks. There's just not stuff in there as we modernize this ordinance to like other towns. I just don't see there's folks going to stand up and go, wow, I just don't agree with the 10-foot rear setback. I just don't see that happening, but it could.
I
You see what I mean?
reiterate my suggestion.
Yeah.
That the commission accept.
I think they will.
I know from other situations, other regulatory bodies always have public comments accepted, which the governing body then reviews.
Well, but like here, we're hearing boards, you guys and the planning commission. We're unique to all these other governments that are out there. You guys are a hearing board. You're supposed to hear evidence and then, like a judge and jury, if there's a court case in district court or circuit court, they don't take written comments in to advise the jury or take a position. The two lawyers and the people testify in front of a judge. And now you get to federal regulations and open comment periods. Yeah, there's written comment periods, but The planning commission's role is to hear evidence and rule on a hearing, just like a zone change like you all do. Again, you guys sit here like judge and jury, you hear the testimony and you make a decision. Petitions that come into you guys can come in, written notes, someone could submit a letter, and someone could have sent a letter today and said, hey, I'm against the daycare, or I have a problem. But that letter, I think with your attorney advisor, you guys have to give it the weight it deserves. It's really not the same evidence as the people that come up here and testify, because you guys can't cross-examine that person.
And Steve, I think that's kind of the crux of the issue. If the letter writer doesn't then follow up by showing up at the meeting, then that's going to affect the weight of their presentation. But
Absolutely.
Sure, you could distribute them to the planning commission beforehand. You could have them introduced as an exhibit to the hearing, and that way it's
there.
part of the record.
But the planning commission deserves the right to be able to ask questions, and that's why if someone has a serious concern, and we're going to have multiple meetings on this, we suggest they would want to come to the hearing and state their case so the planning commission can hear it directly from them, and they might have a few questions to ask them. And there's a lot of stuff in that 110 pages that I think, there's one big issue that nobody's really zeroed in on and probably won't, and I'll explain to the planning commission, but the way we're going to do things in the agricultural district, we're going to be of a different style and nature than we've ever done to protect farmers, honestly, and the agricultural practices of this county. So,
Did I understand Mr. Smith to say that written comments could be accepted?
Can
by
be
the
accepted.
commission, and they could consider them?
That's correct.
but it's best they come show up so they, you know, again, what we tell people, if we get a petition, you know, if we got a petition that's 50 people against that daycare, we would accept that petition into the record and would have went around to all y'all's desks. But Henry would say, you all need to give that the weight it deserves, considering that none of those people are here that, in front of you, that you could either verify they signed that petition, or they have that comment, or maybe you had a question specific. So his advice would be give it the weight it deserves, which means the person's not in the room, but we'll enter it into the record.
And I have a little anxiety that presence is the only evidence of sincerity.
That's a good point. Yes, sir.
I've got a question. In these proposals that you're coming out with, these changes that are to be made, do you have a projected time frame for completion on that?
No.
This year, next year?
No, it'll be, hopefully it's this year. Let me give you an example. And we've been joking around about this. Chapter 4 alone, just the edit time, I sent out to the planning commissioners and I put a note, when I opened up the Word document, I saw 1,800 minutes. And I went, whoa, I didn't work 1,800 minutes on that. Like 24 days of edit time on that one chapter. There's a lot of stuff changing in literally 58 pages. There's a lot of stuff. You know, I spent almost 20-some days working on setbacks and lot sizes and new single-family patio homes and attached townhomes. There's a lot of new products in here that other towns are utilizing, we don't. So I need to walk them through that. There may be some developers in town that don't understand how the attached patio homes in the R1 district versus the R3 will work. So we may get some comments like that. So what we'll probably do is if we ever get to a vote, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, then we got to get it to the governments. And then they might make changes. And then ultimately, we probably need to put a smart effective date out there to give a window for people to deal with these sign issues, permits in process. You know, if currently you're NCC today and something's changing, you know, to be fair to them, they should have a development window before all these rules go into effect. When we change these names, change the standards, change setbacks, change parking, change landscaping. I mean, to be fair to those folks out there, we're probably gonna need to put it out there to give someone an opportunity to say, you know what, I'd rather go under the old landscape ordinance right now and build half the trees or whatever, you know, that kind of thing. So the likelihood, we haven't decided on an effective date yet. That's some of the planning commission deliberation we'll have to do. But I anticipate we try to get it done this year with maybe effective date of October 1 or January 1 of next year. That's kind of the idea. We're putting a standard in for distilleries, craft breweries, restaurants with craft breweries. We've got all kinds of things that evolved over the last dozen years that we don't address, that are out there, that we need to incorporate into zoning text.
I have a question that has nothing to do with zoning.
Mhm.
Well, it does, but not this. When is Junction City coming in to be a part
Junction
of it?
City's back 100%. They're in, we just don't have a zoning ordinance adopted yet, because, number one, we got to get the future land use map adopted first. They've adopted the new comprehensive plan. The subregs are back in play. The future land use map, we have an open house this Saturday from 9 to 12 on the proposed future land use map. We've been working on it for about a year or so, or about 9 months to a year. I can't think of how long exactly. Several drafts of the future land use map. It's going out Saturday to the public, hopefully come to the planning commission this month. Then they'll have their future land use map in play, and all their other stuff will come later. The zoning ordinance is going to be later, and the zoning map will be later after that. So it's an interesting window in Junction City right now, because there's no zoning rules, and it's actually encouraging some economic development for them. There's actually some more stuff happening right now down in Junction City than actually maybe in this jurisdiction here. There's people building buildings and apartments and houses, and because there's no rules right now. And things can be a little bigger and closer without rules. So it's an interesting time right now. But they do have to get building permits, and always have, and we're still issuing permits. The building inspector is. But soon, hopefully this year on that too.
Anyone else have any questions?
No question, I would just, it's a horrendous endeavor, but
It's
I
pretty
think
big.
it is greatly needed and it's worthwhile.
Yeah, appreciate that. Well, and again, I want you guys to be involved, because ultimately all this text ends up in your form. And we're creating several kinds of conditional use permits with lots of new standards, specific use standards, that ultimately will be in front of this board for you guys to review, like you just did on this daycare.
Steve, I want to thank you, commend you for your hard work.
There's a lot of people working on it, wasn't just me. And the planning commission are going to do the heavy lifting. They're the ones that vote ultimately, or don't.
Any other questions? If not, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
All right.
Second?
Second.
Yep.
All in favor?